Have you ever imagined a waitress, fired because of racism, could turn her life around completely? Amara, a small but fearless young woman, not only overcomes prejudice, but also wins the heart of a cold CO. Is this just a love story, or is it a journey of reclaiming self-worth? Don't miss this deeply emotional tale. The warm, golden light from the crystal chandeliers spilled over tables draped in pristine white cloths, creating an air of understated elegance. Crystal glasses shimmered as they caught the light, while silver cutlery was meticulously arranged in the fine dining style. From the corner of the room, soft jazz music drifted, mingling with the faint clink of spoons and forks and the subdued murmur of diners' conversations. Polished couples exchanged words in muted tones, their occasional restrained laughter betraying a coldness that mirrored the distant efficiency of the waitstaff bustling around them. A refined woman adjusted her pearl necklace and dabbed her napkin delicately, while her husband sat across from her, scrolling his phone with disinterest. In stark contrast to the refined calm of the dining hall, the kitchen buzzed with frantic energy. Harsh, white fluorescent lights cast unforgiving shadows over the sweat-streaked faces of the chefs. The relentless chop of knives against cutting boards punctuated the air, accompanied by the sharp sizzle of food searing in hot pans. Staff in crisp white uniforms darted between stations, their exchanges curt and urgent.
"Is the main ready yet? Table 5 needs more bread now."
The air was thick with the rich aroma of butter, herbs, and roasted meat, yet tension hung heavier than the fragrant haze, palpable in every breath. Amara's server uniform was impeccably pressed, though its fabric bore the faded marks of countless washes. Her black apron was tied neatly around her waist, and her soft-soled shoes, designed for the long hours demanded of her role, were worn down at the heels. Her smooth brown skin seemed to glow under the restaurant's golden lights, though the faint sheen of sweat on her brow betrayed the strain of an extended shift. Her face was composed and calm, but her eyes, every so often, revealed a flicker of unease. Beneath her poised exterior lay a fragile sliver of hope. Perhaps tonight would go smoothly. With practiced precision, Amara carried a tray of dishes, balancing it effortlessly. She inclined her head in a polite greeting as she passed a couple's table, the faintest trace of a professional smile gracing her lips. Every motion was deliberate, as though she feared even the slightest misstep might disrupt the immaculate atmosphere of the dining room. Yet no matter how collected her demeanor, the occasional tension in her gaze hinted at the strain she was under. A quiet wish lingered in her heart, an unspoken plea that tonight would be free of mishaps. But the weight of her responsibilities, compounded by the subtle judgment from discerning patrons, loomed over her like an unyielding shadow. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Amara tightened her grip on the tray and began her approach toward the VIP table, fully aware that the real challenge of her evening was about to unfold. The middle-aged man wore a meticulously tailored gray suit, the gleam of his expensive watch catching the light with every emphatic gesture he made. Leaning back in his chair, he exuded an air of power and arrogance, his cold gaze sweeping over Amara like she was an inferior product unworthy of his time. As Amara set the dish down on the table, his brows furrowed, and he burst out,
"Oh my God, what are you doing? Don't you know how to serve? This is a 5-star restaurant, not some roadside stall you're used to."
His voice was loud, dripping with contempt, and deliberately projected to ensure everyone around could hear. He jabbed a finger forcefully at the tray in Amara's hands, his tone sharp and biting as he continued,
"Look at this. You dropped a piece of bread on the table? I'm paying an obscene amount of money for service like this. Absolutely unacceptable."
A murmur rippled through the nearby tables as diners turned to watch, their curiosity tinged with amusement.
"What's going on? Looks like she's made a big mistake." "No surprise there. I noticed she seemed a bit flustered earlier."
Amara froze in place, her eyes widening in shock. A flush crept across her face, not from embarrassment, but from the sting of anger and indignation bubbling up inside her. She swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady, though it wavered slightly.
Sir, I sincerely apologize if I caused any inconvenience, but I don't believe I dropped anything on the table.
He cut her off abruptly, his voice growing louder, more cutting.
God, don't make excuses. I don't want to hear your explanations. A server who can't take responsibility. What else can you do? This is beyond disappointing.
Amara blinked back tears, her fingers tightening around the edges of the tray until her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a quiet determination.
Sir, I am always very careful while serving. I'm certain I didn't drop anything. I checked everything before setting it down.
The man let out a derisive laugh, his eyes narrowing with mockery.
So you're saying I'm lying? How bold of you. Are you accusing me of making this up? No sense of accountability? And now you have the nerve to argue with a customer. Unbelievable.
Mr. Klein, the restaurant manager, approached with a composed but severe expression, his black suit immaculate and his movements precise. His sharp gaze flicked briefly to Amara before focusing on the enraged Veep. Bowing deeply, his voice came smooth and apologetic.
Sir, I deeply regret this inconvenience. This is clearly a failure on our part. I assure you I will handle this matter immediately so it doesn't disrupt your experience further.
Turning to Amara, his expression hardened, his tone cutting.
Amara, the customer is always right. This isn't the first time you've caused trouble on the floor, is it? I've warned you before, haven't I?
Amara fought to keep her voice steady, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her words were measured and dignified.
Sir, I did not drop anything. I am absolutely certain of that.
Mr. Klein's frown deepened, his voice growing colder.
God, you think I'll take your word over a VIP customers? You're making things worse. If you can't do your job properly, perhaps you should find one more suited to your ability.
Amara gripped the tray tightly, bowing her head slightly, but refusing to avert her gaze. Her voice trembled, but it held firm under the weight of her frustration and sorrow.
I have not done anything wrong, sir. I've worked here a long time and have always been diligent in my duties. If you believe I'm at fault, I ask you to verify the facts before making a final decision.
Klein interrupted sharply, his patience clearly worn thin.
That's enough. You've embarrassed us in front of a valued customer. Leave now. I won't waste more time on pointless excuses.
Amara lowered her gaze, her shoulders heavy with humiliation, as she took a step back. Her grip on the tray remained tight, as though it was the last vestige of pride she could hold on to. The diner's whispers swirled around her, piercing like shards of glass.
Is she going to get fired? Probably. How shameful. Honestly, she brought it on herself.
Amara stepped out of the restaurant, clutching her small handbag tightly. Her tired feet carried her slowly down the dimming street, the pale yellow glow of the streetlights stretching out, blurring her shadow as it trailed behind her. As she passed the large sign outside the restaurant, the words, "We value excellence and equality," stood illuminated in bold clarity under the artificial light. She stopped, her gaze fixed on the ornate promise etched into the display. A bitter smile flickered across her lips, a mixture of quiet sarcasm and raw, unhidden pain. A cold thought echoed in her mind.
Equality, just empty words to polish their image. Their excellence and equality were never mentioned.
She took a deep breath, then turned away. Her shoulders seemed smaller under the soft golden haze of the streetlights, but her steps carried a newfound resolve. The faint light of the lamps enveloped Amara's silhouette, blending her into the night. It felt as though an old chapter of her life was closing, giving way to a profound change waiting just beyond the horizon. The night had grown late, and the empty street echoed only with the soft patter of rain. Dry leaves floated along the streams of rainwater running down the edges of the road, forming a desolate and somber tableau. The wet asphalt glistened faintly, reflecting the dim, broken light of yellow street lamps hanging high above, their glow fractured by the swaying shadows of tree branches in the cold wind. On either side of the street, the storefronts were shut tight. A few signs creaked softly in the breeze, their faint, repetitive groans cutting through the stillness. A thin veil of rain covered everything, blurring the scene, turning it into a vision of melancholy and unease. Amara walked slowly along that street. Her server uniform, drenched and clinging to her skin, weighed her down, making each step feel heavier than the last. She clutched her worn canvas bag tightly to her chest, as if it were the only precious thing she could protect. Her shoes, their soles worn thin, splashed into shallow puddles, the squelching sound a lonely echo in the quiet night. Her gaze was distant, her tired eyes reflecting the exhaustion of a long, grueling day. Yet within that weariness lingered a faint glimmer of resilience, a quiet defiance she had crafted for herself. No matter how heavy the burdens, her steps remained steady, as though she were determined not just to cross the street, but to move beyond the unseen trials weighing on her life. From the shadowy corner of a narrow alley, a dark figure suddenly darted out, shattering the oppressive stillness of the street. The hurried sound of his footsteps echoed sharply through the rain, blending with the distant hum of engines. These chaotic noises disrupted the once tranquil night, turning it into a scene of sudden commotion. Ahead, an elderly woman wrapped in a thin raincoat was walking slowly, her frail frame barely withstanding the weight of the downpour. Her umbrella, old and loose at its joints, quivered against the gusts of wind battering it from all sides. Clutched tightly to her chest was a small handbag, held as though it was the only thing she could trust in the desolation of the late hour. The fragile side of her seemed even smaller beneath the relentless rain. The shadow lunged forward, without hesitation, snatching at the woman's handbag with a rough, decisive motion. Startled, the woman cried out, her voice breaking with fear.
"Help! Oh my God, somebody help me!"
Her scream echoed down the empty street, cutting through the rain's steady rhythm. She fell hard onto the slippery pavement, her hands flailing desperately in the air, grasping for anything to pull herself upright. Her umbrella was torn from her grip, tumbling along the wet asphalt before coming to rest, lifeless in a puddle. The thief, wearing a gray hoodie, gripped the bag tightly. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes flickering with unease and anxiety. His hurried, jerky movements betrayed his lack of preparation, but his grip on the small handbag remained unyielding. Amara, not far away, froze at the sound of the woman's desperate cries. Her eyes widened in shock, taking in the surreal scene before her. The elderly woman sprawled on the rain-slicked street, her bag being ripped away by the stranger.
"Oh my God!"
Amara muttered, a fleeting sense of helplessness washing over her. But she refused to let fear take hold. Without hesitation, she dropped her worn canvas bag to the ground and bolted toward the thief. Amara charged forward with all her strength and resolve, blocking the thief's path without a moment of hesitation. Her soaked uniform clung to her body, and the cold made her shiver uncontrollably, but she ignored the discomfort as if the chill and exhaustion no longer mattered. She lunged, her hands gripping the elderly woman's bag tightly. She yanked it back with all her might, determined not to let it fall into the thief's hands.
"Let go. This doesn't belong to you,"
she shouted, her voice trembling but filled with unwavering determination. The thief, startled by her resistance, spun around, his eyes flaring with anger. Tightening his grip on the bag, he snarled in a harsh, threatening voice.
"Do you even know what you're doing? Let go. Who do you think you are, meddling in this? Do you want to die?"
Amara panted, her small hands clutching the bag with a strength that defied her slight frame. The disparity in their strength was undeniable, and her worn shoes slipped slightly on the wet pavement. Yet she fought to keep her balance, her chin lifting as her sharp, determined gaze locked onto his.
"I'm someone who won't let you steal from an innocent old woman,"
she retorted, her voice resolute despite her labored breaths. The thief faltered for a moment, seemingly caught off guard by her audacity, but the pause was brief. His anger surged, blazing like fire. Her words had struck a nerve, cutting deep into his wounded pride.
"Oh my God, don't think you can play hero here,"
he yelled, pulling the bag harder as if to assert his dominance. Amara stumbled but refused to let go. He shoved her forcefully, sending her sprawling onto the slick, unforgiving pavement. The sound of her body hitting the ground was sharp and jarring. Her knees scraped against the rough asphalt, leaving a raw, stinging gash. She bit her lip hard, swallowing the cry of pain that threatened to escape. The thief tugged on the bag again, but Amara held firm, clutching it with both hands, as though it were her sole purpose in that moment.
"Are you insane? It's just a bag. Let go now,"
he bellowed, his voice tinged with panic, as he met her unyielding stare. Amara gasped for air, her voice breaking but resolute, as she replied,
"It's hers. You have no right to take it. I won't let you no matter what."
The thief's patience began to fray. His arm trembled from the effort of wrestling against her fierce resistance, though she was so much smaller than him.
"Shut up. You don't understand. I need it. I don't have a choice,"
he shouted, his voice a volatile mix of desperation and anger. For a split second, Amara hesitated, stunned by his impassioned outburst. But she quickly shook off the moment of doubt, tightening her grip. Her eyes burned with renewed determination.
"Is that so? That doesn't give you the right to steal from someone else. Everyone has choices. You're just choosing the wrong one."
Her words hit him like a blow, and he froze briefly, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. But before either of them could act further, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the rain. Headlights pierced the darkness, their blinding beams casting a harsh light over the scene. The thief froze, his head snapping toward the oncoming car. Panic flared in his expression as he scanned the street for an escape route. His grip on the bag began to loosen, his confidence evaporating in an instant.
"Damn it!"
he hissed, his voice dripping with frustration and defeat. Without another word, he released the bag and bolted into the shadows, disappearing into the rain. Soaked night. Amara collapsed onto the cold, wet ground, gasping for breath. Her entire body trembled, not just from pain, but from the adrenaline and fear coursing through her veins. Her hands, though aching and raw, clung to the bag instinctively. She looked down at it, her breathing gradually slowing as a wave of relief washed over her. It felt as though she had just accomplished the most significant act of her life.
"Oh my God, I did it,"
she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if trying to reassure herself it was over. Rain streamed down her face, mingling with tears she couldn't hold back. But she didn't care. She lifted the bag, her hands shaking from the cold and the ordeal, yet her eyes shone with fierce determination. One thing was clear in her heart. She had refused to let injustice prevail. Eleanor, a petite elderly woman with snow-white hair neatly tied back, stood trembling before Amara. The deep lines on her face, etched by time, reflected both the fragility of what she had just endured and the quiet grace of someone who carried herself with dignity, even in distress. Her trembling hands reached out, gently touching the handbag Amara had just rescued from the thief. When she received it, she clutched it tightly, as if holding a precious treasure, her eyes shining with uncontainable emotion.
"Thank you, dear. Oh my goodness, I don't know what I would have done without you."
Her voice, raspy and frail, wavered, nearly breaking under the lingering terror of the ordeal. Amara offered a soft smile, her eyes full of concern and kindness. Her voice, though gentle, carried a steady reassurance.
"Are you all right? Don't worry, it's over now. I couldn't just stand by and let that happen."
Eleanor held the bag closer, as though its presence alone gave her a sense of security. Her gaze lingered on Amara's face, where raindrops mixed with beads of sweat on her brow. Amara's hands, reddened and raw from the struggle, trembled slightly, yet she stood there with a strength and composure that seemed almost unshakable.
"You're such a kind soul. I've never seen anyone willing to step in like that, especially at this hour of the night,"
Eleanor said, her voice laden with gratitude. But her expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing her features as she glanced at Amara's injuries. Amara shook her head lightly, offering a faint but sincere smile. Her eyes glimmered as if to brush away the older woman's worries.
"It's okay now, really. As long as you're safe, that's all that matters."
Eleanor's gaze dropped to Amara's hands, which still trembled from the pain and cold, but radiated a quiet, remarkable gentleness. Her heart ached, not just from relief but from the guilt of knowing this brave young woman had suffered on her behalf.
"But you're hurt,"
Eleanor said softly, her voice tinged with worry.
"Your knee too? It's scraped. I can see it."
She gestured toward the wound on Amara's leg, her eyes filled with genuine concern. Amara glanced down at her injury, wincing faintly before quickly lifting her head again, offering a reassuring smile.
"It's nothing, really. Just a small scratch. Not worth worrying about. But you rushed in to protect me in this bag. I feel terrible knowing you had to endure all this, but..."
Eleanor's voice grew heavy with sorrow, her words a blend of apology and gratitude. Amara shook her head firmly, her expression serious yet kind.
"Please don't say that. Sometimes you just have to do what's right, no matter the consequences. Anyone in my position would have done the same." "No, not anyone,"
Eleanor replied, her voice soft but resolute.
"What you did was extraordinary. You didn't just help me. You showed me that kindness still exists, even from strangers."
Amara was quiet for a moment, her expression softening as the weight of Eleanor's words settled over her. She hadn't thought of her actions as anything remarkable, but the older woman's gratitude made her feel that her decision had truly mattered.
"I just couldn't stand by and do nothing,"
Amara said softly, her voice low but filled with sincerity.
"If I hadn't acted, I know I'd regret it for the rest of my life."
Eleanor placed a hand gently on Amara's arm, her touch firm yet warm, as if trying to convey her deep appreciation through that single gesture.
"Thank you, truly. I don't know how I'll ever repay you."
Amara shook her head again, her smile humble and genuine.
"You don't need to repay me. Really, knowing you're safe is enough for me."
Eleanor gazed at the young woman before her, and her heart swelled with an indescribable mix of emotions. Amara's courage, kindness, and humility touched her in a way that felt profound and deeply personal.
"You're not just kind, you're incredibly brave,"
Eleanor said, her voice steady but tinged with admiration.
"You're a very special person, my dear."
Amara said nothing, simply bowing her head slightly in acknowledgement of the older woman's words, her eyes still shining with humility. Amara bent down and picked up Eleanor's fallen umbrella. It was old, with a few broken ribs exposed under the dim street light. She carefully adjusted it as best as she could before handing it back to the elderly woman. Then, stepping closer, she gently supported Eleanor, her hand steadying the frail but dignified arm.
"Let me help you. Can you walk?"
Eleanor nodded softly. Beneath the steady rain, the two walked slowly, each step measured as they moved through the silent, empty streets. The sound of their footsteps mingled with the rain, creating a quiet, rhythmic harmony that felt warm despite the cold night. When they reached a large gate, Amara came to an abrupt stop, her eyes widening in surprise. Before her stood a grand mansion, its towering iron gates intricately wrought with delicate designs that seemed to bear the touch of a master artisan. Beyond the gates, golden lights lined a polished stone pathway leading to a sprawling house with high, sloping roofs and massive windows framed by dark wood. Amara froze, her expression a mix of astonishment and uncertainty.
"You live here?"
she blurted out, her voice tinged with disbelief. Eleanor stopped in front of the gate and turned to Amara with a gentle smile.
"Yes, this is my home. Tomorrow, I'd like you to come by. I want to thank you properly.
Amara hesitated, bowing her head slightly as she shook it.
That's not necessary, Mom. I just did what anyone should do.
But Eleanor's smile remained unwavering, her eyes filled with a profound sincerity and gratitude.
You did more than what was right, dear. And I can't let your kindness go unanswered with just words. Please come tomorrow.
Amara stood silent for a moment, her gaze meeting Eleanor's steady, determined eyes. Finally, she nodded slightly, saying nothing more. As Eleanor passed through the grand gates, her figure slowly merged with the warm golden light beyond. Amara turned and began walking away, her steps soft against the rain-slicked street. Before disappearing into the curtain of rain, she glanced back once more, her eyes lingering on the imposing mansion. A strange feeling flickered in her chest, a quiet intuition that something larger was on the horizon. The rain continued to fall, its steady rhythm blurring Amara's small figure as she disappeared into the solitude of the empty street. Amara returned to Eleanor's mansion, feeling an odd sense of tranquility in the air. As she stepped through the large wrought iron gates adorned with intricate patterns, she couldn't help but marvel at the imposing sight of the grand estate. The massive windows glowed warmly from within. The polished stone pathway leading to the entrance was immaculate, and vibrant red rose bushes flanking the walkway seemed meticulously tended, blooming proudly in the soft morning light. Entering the main door, she was greeted by a housekeeper who guided her to the living room. Amara's eyes wandered around, taking in the overwhelming elegance of the space. The room was expansive, decorated in a classic style that exuded both sophistication and warmth. A plush velvet sofa in deep crimson sat at the center, encircling a meticulously carved wooden table with intricate floral patterns. A thick Persian rug stretched across the floor, its intricate designs lending the space an exotic and regal charm. The walls were adorned with family portraits. Most striking of all was a large painting of a younger Eleanor, standing beside her husband, a tall, dignified black man with an air of authority and determination in his sharp gaze. At their feet was a young boy with bright, intelligent eyes and a face brimming with promise, Isaiah, their only son. Along one wall stretched a massive bookshelf, crammed with old volumes and interspersed with keepsakes, crystal figurines, antique clocks, and small framed photographs capturing cherished family moments. Amara was ushered to a long dining table draped in pristine white linen. The silverware gleamed, each piece arranged with precise elegance. On the table sat trays of golden brown pastries, jars of colorful jams, strawberry, orange, peach, and steaming cups of fragrant Earl Grey tea. At the head of the table sat Eleanor, her back straight, as she held a delicate porcelain teacup. Her eyes rested on Amara with a gentle yet commanding presence.
Please eat,
Eleanor said softly, her tone warm but firm.
This is the simplest breakfast I could offer, but I hope you feel at ease.
Amara nodded hesitantly, overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. She tried her best to maintain composure, lifting the teacup carefully and taking a small sip. After breakfast, Eleanor set her cup down with deliberate grace and rose to her feet. She moved to Amara's side, her movements measured and dignified.
Come with me. There's something I want to show you,
she said. Curious, Amara stood and followed Eleanor down a long hallway. Sunlight streamed in through large windows lining the corridor, casting a soft glow on the walls, adorned with neatly hung paintings. Each depicted a moment in Eleanor's family's history, an intimate chronicle of their legacy. They entered a smaller room, no less splendid than the rest of the house. This space resembled a family museum, displaying significant achievements and cherished memories. Eleanor stopped before a large photograph. Her gaze grew distant yet tender as she looked at the image of her late husband, receiving a prestigious economic award.
This is my husband,
she began, her voice tinged with emotion.
He was a great man, a man who defied countless prejudices to build a financial empire that remains respected to this day.
Amara studied the photograph, her eyes reflecting admiration. Yet, as Eleanor spoke, a question formed in her mind.
"Yours a billionaire?"
Amara blurted out, her eyes widening in disbelief.
"I had no idea."
Eleanor chuckled softly, her fingers brushing over the edge of the photo frame.
"I've never been one to boast about it,"
she said with a light laugh.
"But yes, my family has worked tirelessly to create what you see here. Still, what I'm most proud of isn't the wealth. It's the values we've upheld, the value of compassion."
Amara fell silent, the weight of Eleanor's words sinking in. She thought back to the previous night, when she had helped Eleanor without knowing who she was. It made her feel that her actions were small, insignificant even. Yet Eleanor looked at her with an entirely different perspective.
"You helped me without knowing anything about me. You didn't need to know. That speaks volumes about who you are,"
Eleanor said, her voice full of sincerity.
"Your kindness comes from within. It's not driven by status or gain."
Amara lowered her head, her voice quiet.
"I just thought, if I didn't act, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. I couldn't stand by and watch something wrong happen."
Eleanor gently placed a hand on Amara's shoulder, her touch both tender and resolute.
"You're not just brave. You're genuine. I've never met anyone quite like you, and I believe you deserve a chance to change your life."
Amara looked up, her expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Eleanor's words felt like a prelude to something profound, something life-altering.
"Have you ever considered,"
Eleanor continued, her voice soft but laden with meaning,
"that a single act of kindness can change not only someone else's life, but your own as well? You've shown me that compassion isn't just a virtue, it's a true strength. And now, I want you to join me in carrying that forward."
Amara didn't reply immediately, her wide eyes locked on Eleanor's. In her heart, a strange and stirring feeling began to rise, the sense that this encounter was the beginning of something transformative, something far greater than she could have imagined. After leading Amara through the family exhibit room, Eleanor invited her back to the living room. She gestured for Amara to sit in a plush armchair near the large window, where the soft morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a warm, tranquil glow over the room. Amara hesitated briefly before sitting, her eyes still reflecting a hint of unease after everything she had just learned. Eleanor picked up a small photo frame from the side table next to her chair. It held an image of a young black man, sharp and dashing in a suit, smiling beside a beautiful woman whose radiant eyes spoke of profound happiness. Eleanor handed the frame to Amara, her voice lowering, heavy with an indescribable sadness.
"This is my son Isaiah and his wife. A beautiful couple, aren't they?"
Amara looked at the photo, her eyes lingering on Isaiah's face. Though he smiled, there was an unmistakable weight in his gaze, as if he were concealing a deeper sorrow. Eleanor continued, her voice trembling slightly.
"Isaiah is all I have left. He's always been talented, strong, and full of ambition. But ever since his wife passed away in an accident, his heart has closed itself off. He's not the man he once was. I'm afraid that if he continues down this path, he'll lose all hope."
Amara set the photo down gently, her expression softening with empathy. But before she could say anything, Eleanor turned to her, her eyes suddenly resolute.
"I believe you can help him?"
Amara blinked, startled.
"Amy, what are you saying?"
Eleanor smiled faintly, though her voice was firm, unwavering.
"Isaiah needs someone with a heart like yours, Amara. Someone who doesn't shy away from challenges. Someone who chooses to do what's right without expecting anything in return. He needs someone who can help him find his way back to himself."
Amara sat frozen, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. Her voice wavered with a hint of panic.
"What are you saying? I'm just an ordinary girl. There's nothing special about me that could possibly make you think I belong in your world, or that I could help your son overcome his pain."
Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze kind yet resolute.
Never say you're not enough, Amara. Sometimes the people who feel they don't belong are the very ones who can bring about the greatest change. You have a strong heart and a genuine soul. That is what Isaiah needs more than anything else.
Amara rose from her seat, her hands clasped tightly together, as if to steady the storm of emotions rising within her. She felt she could no longer sit still, not when everything Eleanor was saying seemed too overwhelming to grasp. She moved slowly to the large window, her gaze falling on the garden outside. The crimson roses were in full bloom beneath the soft morning sunlight, each petal meticulously cared for, creating a scene of serene beauty. Gentle breezes stirred the lush green leaves, sending shimmering droplets of dew cascading to the ground like tiny jewels. Yet even the tranquil charm of the garden couldn't quiet the unease and turmoil stirring in Amara's heart. Eleanor approached quietly, the sound of her heels clicking softly but resonantly in the stillness of the room. Standing just behind Amara, she placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her voice, low but resolute, broke the silence.
You're thinking I'm asking too much of you, aren't you?
Amara turned her head, her eyes filled with worry and hesitation. She couldn't hide her emotions as she replied,
You are. You're expecting too much from me. I'm just a waitress. You know that. I don't know the first thing about running a company. I don't even know how to exist in your world.
She sighed deeply, her eyes brimming with uncertainty.
I don't even know if I'm brave enough to step into your son's life, let alone make any difference.
Eleanor offered a soft smile, but her eyes remained patient and unwavering. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch Amara's young, uncertain face.
You think I'm asking for something grand, don't you? I'm not, Amara. I don't need you to know how to run a company, nor do I need you to live the way I do. What I need is your heart, the sincerity and courage you showed me last night.
Amara shook her head slightly, her gaze dropping as though she couldn't meet Eleanor's steady eyes.
But I don't know if I can do what you're asking. I'm not like the people in your world. I'm afraid I'll only make things worse.
Eleanor took another step forward, gently clasping Amara's hands. Her eyes bore into Amara's with a depth that conveyed both conviction and compassion.
You're afraid, and that's perfectly natural. But don't let that fear stop you from embracing an opportunity to change your life. And Isaiah's, you've already proven that you can do what's right without needing a reason. That's what matters most.
Amara frowned slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if the words were meant for Eleanor alone.
But why me? There are thousands of people out there who are more deserving, more capable, more suited to your world than I am.
Eleanor leaned closer, her hands tightening ever so slightly on Amara's, her voice tinged with encouragement.
Never think you're undeserving, Amara. The ones who feel they don't belong are often the very people who bring about the greatest changes. Isaiah doesn't need someone perfect. He needs someone honest, someone who cares, and someone who dares to act on what they know. That's why I believe you are the one.
Amara turned back toward the window, her eyes drifting to the rows of roses. Her brow furrowed slightly, and her heart felt as though it were caught between the weight of being valued and the fear of an immense responsibility.
I don't know if I can bear this,
she murmured.
I'm afraid I'll fail, that I'll end up hurting your son instead of helping him.
Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping to a softer yet no less resolute tone.
I don't expect you to do anything other than be yourself, Amara. Isaiah doesn't need someone to fix the world for him. He needs someone who can help him unlock the doors to his heart, doors he's kept closed for far too long.
Amara turned to face Eleanor, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder, her smile warm and reassuring.
You don't have to face this alone. I'll be here and Isaiah will be here. These things take time, but I believe you have the strength to face this.
Amara didn't reply immediately, her gaze falling to her hand still held gently by Eleanor's. Eleanor's words felt like seeds being planted in her heart, uncertain and fragile, but filled with the potential to grow. The room fell silent, illuminated by the gentle light streaming in through the large window. It wasn't a silence of pressure, but one of quiet expectation, a sense that something profound and transformative was on the horizon. Finally, Amara nodded slowly, the hesitation still evident in her eyes. Her voice was soft, almost tentative.
"I need time to think, but I won't say no right now."
Eleanor smiled, her satisfaction evident as she released Amara's hands with care.
"Good, Amara, take the time you need. Just remember, I'm here to help you, and Isaiah needs you more than you realize."
Amara looked at Eleanor again, searching for the right words, but ultimately saying nothing. The older woman's words continued to echo in her mind, like a small but insistent voice urging her towards something greater. The sunlight outside streamed through the window, casting its warm glow over the crimson roses, as if illuminating a quiet hope within Amara. In that moment, the stillness of the mansion felt like a silent reminder of the turning point that lay ahead. The office occupied the top floor of the corporate headquarters, an open space dominated by a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a sweeping view of the city. Bathed in the bright morning light, the bustling streets, towering skyscrapers, and ceaseless flow of traffic below created a symphony of life and motion. Yet, the constant movement of the world outside seemed entirely divorced from the profound stillness within the office. The interior was minimalist, yet undeniably luxurious. At the heart of the room stood a polished walnut desk, its natural grain flowing like soft waves. Behind it, a high-backed black leather chair exuded authority. Abstract paintings adorned the walls, their bold and cold-color palettes adding to the room's austere ambience. In one corner, a sleek bookshelf held volumes on business and finance, their spines arranged with meticulous precision. Personal touches were sparse, save for a small picture frame lying face down on the desk, as though its owner preferred its contents remain unseen. The entire space radiated power, but also an undeniable loneliness, an unmistakable reflection of the mood and personality of its occupant. Isaiah sat behind the desk, his demeanor calm yet commanding. Clad in a dark suit, his deep blue tie stood out against the pristine white of his shirt. Every feature of his face, from the sharp line of his jaw to the intensity in his eyes, conveyed the image of a serious and impenetrable man. His gaze rested on the laptop screen before him, though his attention had drifted from the rows of figures and graphs displayed there. The quiet hum of his focus was broken when the office door opened and Amara stepped inside. Isaiah lifted his head, his sharp eyes fixing on her with an expression that was both precise and unyielding. His gaze lingered on her, scrutinizing every detail, as if he were trying to discern her intentions without asking. There was a shadow of skepticism in his eyes, an unspoken question about her presence in this space. Yet behind his composed and severe exterior, a faint trace of arrogance flickered, the mark of a man accustomed to control, one who instinctively kept others at arm's length. For a moment, the room seemed charged with an unspoken tension. The light streaming through the massive windows illuminated the stark divide between the two figures. A man and a woman from vastly different worlds, unexpectedly brought into the same frame. Amara walked slowly toward Isaiah's desk, carrying a carefully reviewed and edited report in her hands. She took a deep breath, willing herself to maintain a professional demeanor, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration at Isaiah's complete disregard for her presence. Isaiah, reclining in his luxurious leather chair, kept his gaze fixed on the laptop screen before him. His fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, as if engrossed in tasks far more important. It wasn't until Amara placed the report on his desk, the sound soft yet deliberate, that he finally glanced at it. Even then, his expression remained indifferent. Amara, despite sensing the unspoken dismissal in his behavior, kept her tone steady and composed as she presented her thoughts.
"I've reviewed this document and believe that focusing more on its human aspect could improve it. It would make the project more relatable to the community and foster a stronger, positive connection.
Isaiah raised an eyebrow, his eyes briefly scanning the report again. His gaze was cold, detached, and unreadable, as if her words had barely registered. After a few moments of silence, he closed the report with deliberate slowness and set it back on the desk.
"Your job is to assist,"
he said, his voice flat and unfeeling.
"not to alter my strategy."
His words cut through the quiet of the room like an invisible blade. Amara pressed her lips together, her hand clenched at her side as she struggled to contain the surge of disappointment rising within her. She had braced herself for his aloofness, but the sheer extent of his indifference and arrogance still stung. Unable to remain silent, she spoke, her voice betraying a hint of suppressed emotion.
"I'm not trying to change your strategy. I'm trying to contribute to make things better. But it seems my input doesn't matter here, does it?"
Isaiah regarded her for a moment, his expression unyielding. Then, with a slight shrug, he turned back to his laptop. A faint, almost mocking smile tugged at his lips.
"That's correct, because I don't need your input."
The words landed like a blow to Amara's pride. She drew in a sharp breath, swallowing the urge to react. His arrogance was more than she had anticipated, a wall she hadn't expected to feel so impenetrable.
"Then why am I here?"
she asked, her voice quieter now, tinged with unmistakable disappointment.
"Is it just because your mother put me here?"
Her question made Isaiah pause briefly, his sharp eyes flickering with an unreadable emotion. But it lasted only a second before he regained his usual composure.
"You should know your place and focus on your duties,"
he said, his tone colder now with a faint edge of warning.
"Don't presume to guess other people's intentions."
Amara stared at him, her gaze unwavering despite the frustration burning in her chest. She no longer bothered hiding her emotions as she replied,
"That's exactly what I'm doing. My job. But do you have any idea how difficult it is to focus when you dismiss everything I try to contribute?"
Isaiah frowned, her words clearly unsettling him, though he didn't show it outright. Instead of responding, he turned back to his laptop, typing with precision as though to end the conversation.
"If you have nothing else to say,"
he said curtly,
"you may leave."
The detachment in his voice thickened the air between them, making the room feel unbearably heavy. Amara stood still for a moment, her eyes fixed on him, searching for something, anything, in his expression. But all she saw was silence, a wall that refused to let her in. She turned and walked out into the long hallway, her mind swirling with questions she couldn't quiet. The sound of her heels echoed against the marble floor, steady but hollow, as if mocking the confusion in her heart. "Why am I even here?" she wondered bitterly. Isaiah doesn't care that I'm here. So what's Eleanor's true purpose? Stopping at a large window, Amara looked out at the towering skyscrapers in the distance. The city pulsed with life, vibrant and relentless, a stark contrast to the loneliness weighing her down. She let out a soft sigh, willing herself not to remain sidelined in this strange, unfamiliar world. Back inside the office, Isaiah exhaled softly, his eyes still on the screen, but his mind elsewhere. The determined yet disappointed look in Amara's eyes lingered, unsettling him in a way he couldn't quite place. He shook the thought away, returning to the long list of tasks awaiting him. Just then, a notification popped up on his screen, reminding him of the corporate gala scheduled for the next evening. His brows furrowed. Such events always felt more like burdens than celebrations. A stage where he was expected to wear a flawless mask, enduring scrutinizing glances and hollow pleasantries. Tomorrow night, every employee, from the highest executives to the assistants, will be in attendance. Amara will be no exception, and as the evening unfolds, will the walls of defense that both Amara and Isaiah have carefully built withstand the brewing storm, or will they begin to crack, revealing secrets neither of them is ready to face? The grand conference hall of the corporation, typically reserved for strategic meetings and high-stakes contract signings, had been transformed into a dazzling space worthy of the company's most iconic event. Massive crystal chandeliers hung high from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow that danced across the polished marble floor. The soft light blended seamlessly with the pristine white tablecloths draping the banquet tables, creating an atmosphere both elegant and solemn. Each table was an artwork in itself, set with gleaming silverware arranged with meticulous precision beside crystal-clear glasses. At the center of each table stood arrangements of white roses interspersed with rare blue blooms, their colors striking a perfect balance of harmony and sophistication. Around the room, employees clad in high-end evening attire clustered in small groups, holding glasses of wine that glimmered under the chandelier's glow. Laughter and polite exchanges rippled sporadically through the air. But beneath the surface, an undercurrent of subtle discrimination lingered. Every so often, a pair of eyes would glance toward Amara, not with warmth, but with veiled contempt, masked behind courteous smiles. Amara, dressed in an elegant deep blue gown, stood near the edge of the room, her posture calm but resolute. Her hair was neatly styled in a tight bun, her polished heels glinting under the light. Yet it was the way she held herself, a quiet confidence mixed with deliberate restraint, that set her apart. This very distinction, along with the undeniable difference in her skin tone, made her an easy target for whispered jabs. Near one of the tables, a group of colleagues had begun a conversation just loud enough for Amara to hear. Leading the group was a blonde woman in a striking red gown. She took a sip of her wine, tilting her head slightly as she spoke, her tone dripping with mockery.
She must have some strong connections.
The woman let out a faint laugh, her gaze lazily sweeping toward Amara.
Otherwise, how else does someone like her get this far?
A younger man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo chuckled in agreement. He smirked, his voice carrying an exaggerated emphasis as he added,
Exactly. It's a good thing our company values diversity.
The way he lingered on the word made the compliment sound like an insult. The group erupted into laughter, as though their words were the pinnacle of wit. Amara bit her lip, forcing herself to ignore them, but each word felt like a sharp blade, cutting into her sense of self-worth. Her eyes focused on the glass of wine in her hand, but her tightened grip betrayed the anger boiling within her. Not far away, Isaiah stood alone, holding a glass of red wine. His sharp gaze lingered on Amara, his brows furrowing slightly, as he overheard the group's remarks. Though he remained still, an unmistakable discomfort flickered in his expression. Amara, unable to endure the humiliation any longer, turned and walked straight toward Isaiah. Her eyes burned with a mix of anger and disappointment as she confronted him. Her voice was low but sharp, slicing through the ambient noise like a blade.
You're not going to say anything?
Isaiah met her gaze, his eyes briefly flickering with hesitation. He understood what she expected from him, but instead of rising to the challenge, he sighed, lowering his voice so only she could hear.
Not now. We can't change how they think with one confrontation.
Amara's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. His response felt cold, dismissive. An act of complacency she couldn't accept. Her voice grew firmer, though still controlled.
Not now. So never. Do you really think staying silent is going to make things better?
Isaiah hesitated. Setting his glass on the nearest table, he tried to maintain his composure, but his eyes avoided hers.
Silence is sometimes the only way to survive. This is a long game, and not everything can be fixed.
Amara let out a bitter laugh, her lips curving into a smile filled with disappointment. She stepped back, her voice trembling slightly as she replied,
I thought you, of all people, would understand what it feels like to be treated like this. But I guess I was wrong.
Her words struck Isaiah like a blow, but he said nothing in return. He stood frozen, his gaze following her as she turned and walked away, retreating from the judgmental stares of the group. Isaiah remained where he was, his shoulders sinking slightly, not from her words, but from her expression. The disappointment in her eyes lingered like a wound, cutting deeper than he expected. He closed his eyes briefly, his hand tightening around the unfinished glass of wine, but still, he didn't speak. The office was bathed in the dim light of a single desk lamp. Darkness from the floor to ceiling windows shrouded the city beyond, save for the faint glow of scattered streetlights piercing through the night. Isaiah sat motionless behind his desk, his sharp gaze fixed on the laptop screen before him. Yet his thoughts were far from the numbers and reports displayed there. The door swung open with a sharp click. Amara stepped in, her heels striking the floor with deliberate force, each step resonating with simmering anger. Isaiah glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it quickly hardened back into his usual cold demeanor. Amara didn't wait for him to speak. She flung her employee badge onto the desk, the small card sliding across the polished surface until it stopped directly in front of him. Her voice cut through the heavy silence, cold and unyielding but trembling with uncontainable frustration.
I can't do this anymore.
Isaiah leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He didn't touch the badge, his gaze locking onto hers with a faint hint of challenge.
Is that so? This is how you handle things, by giving up?
Amara clenched her fists, her eyes blazing with fury.
Giving up?
She repeated, her voice rising.
You think I'm giving up? No, Isaiah. I'm refusing to keep tolerating the injustice and silence you've so willingly embraced.
Isaiah rose swiftly, his movements sharp and controlled. His voice remained calm, eerily so, yet carried an undercurrent of steel.
Silence isn't giving up, Amara. Do you think you can change the way they see you just by shouting for fairness? Don't be naive. The world doesn't change with kindness or bold words. I learned it the hard way.
Amara met his gaze, her own eyes glistening with hurt and deep disappointment.
You're right,
she said, her voice steady but cutting.
You learned that lesson, but at what cost? By accepting them, by standing by while they trample over others. Do you think that makes you stronger?
Isaiah's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. His voice, though even, carried a bitter edge.
I don't accept them, Amara. I've simply learned that some battles can't be won by charging in head first. Do you honestly believe you can walk in here, yell a few words, and change everything? That's not how the world works.
Amara let out a bitter laugh, her smile laced with pain and frustration.
Maybe you've gotten so used to how they treat you that you've stopped fighting. But I haven't, Isaiah. I won't let them look down on me because of my skin, and I can't stand by and watch you let them do it to you.
Isaiah froze. Her words struck like a dagger, piercing through the carefully constructed walls of pride he had built to protect himself. He didn't respond, but neither could he deny the truth in what she had said. Amara took a deep breath, her voice lowering but losing none of its determination.
Maybe you've forgotten how to fight, Isaiah. Maybe you've learned how to live in their world, but I haven't. I can't stay here if it means losing my self-respect. I'd rather walk away than accept that.
Isaiah stared at her, his eyes flickering with something unspoken. For the first time in their conversation, the icy confidence in his expression seemed to crack, revealing a man torn between logic and emotion.
You think I don't want to fight?
He said at last, his voice low and strained.
You don't know what I've lost to get here. I've had to endure to bury every ounce of pride I had just to earn their acceptance, but it's never enough. It's never enough.
Amara's gaze softened, though her voice remained firm.
You're right. It will never be enough if you let them control how you live. But I won't follow that path, Isaiah. I can't.
The room fell silent. Isaiah lowered his head, his hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't speak again. Amara waited, hoping he would find something to say, but the only response she received was silence. His tall frame, shrouded in the dim light, seemed lonelier than ever. Amara sighed, her eyes glinting with a mixture of sadness and resolve. She turned and walked toward the door, her heels echoing faintly against the cold floor. Just before leaving, she paused, her voice quiet but ringing with clarity.
I hope one day you remember who you are, Isaiah. When that day comes, maybe you'll understand why I couldn't see.
Amara stepped out of the office, her legs heavy, but her steps deliberate. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. She refused to let anyone, even herself, believe she was weak. Behind the door that had just closed, Isaiah remained still, his hands gripping the edge of the desk tightly. His eyes were fixed on Amara's employee badge, reflecting the torment and helplessness within him. He wanted to say something, wanted to stop her, but all he could do was watch as her figure drifted further and further away. The steady rhythm of Amara's heels echoed on the marble floor, blending with the oppressive silence of the long hallway. Soft light streaming through the large windows fell across her back, casting a faint glow over her silhouette. Her shadow stretched long on the floor. Solitary but unyielding, Amara didn't look back. She walked on, step by step, her heart heavy with pain yet filled with resolve.
I made the right choice,
she told herself, though her heart shattered into pieces with every step. She disappeared around the corner at the end of the hallway, but her steadfast silhouette remained etched in Isaiah's mind. The office door closed behind her, sealing in a suffocating silence. Isaiah stood frozen, his gaze lost on the badge lying on the desk, a haunting reminder he couldn't ignore. He couldn't ignore. He knew Amara was right. She had chosen to leave with her dignity intact, while he, for years, had convinced himself that silence was the only way to survive. Yet now, the image of her unyielding resolve deepened the cracks in the walls he had built around himself. The glow of his phone screen suddenly pierced the dimness, pulling Isaiah out of his thoughts. A message from his mother, Eleanor.
Don't forget about the charity event tonight. It's important.
Isaiah sighed softly and set the phone down. But deep down, he knew tonight wasn't just another event. It would be a collision of his past, Amara's departure, and choices he could no longer avoid. Under the dazzling light of crystal chandeliers, the main dining hall of the restaurant gleamed, a stark contrast to Amara's memories of this place. Tables dressed in pristine white linens were adorned with meticulously arranged fresh flowers. Guests, powerful executives, prominent philanthropists, and media representatives, glimmered in their evening finery, their faces perpetually lit with polite, practiced smiles. The clink of wine glasses echoed throughout the space, but somewhere in the crowd, a few gazes had already begun searching for Amara's presence. Not far away, the kitchen pulsed with an entirely different rhythm. Cold fluorescent lights reflected off stainless steel walls. The relentless hiss of searing pans and the sharp thud of cleavers hitting cutting boards filled the air, composing a cacophony of chaos and urgency. This had once been Amara's world, a place with no fresh flowers, no chandeliers, and certainly no artificial pleasantries. But this time, her return was not as the humble worker she had once been. In this opulent space, how would old memories collide with the person she had become? And Isaiah, standing face to face with the injustices he had once ignored in a place that symbolized them, would he choose to remain silent or finally step out of the shell he had built so carefully? The main banquet hall was a seamless blend of elegance and opulence. Large crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting shimmering light across the room, highlighting every intricate detail of the refined decor. The tables, draped in pristine white linens trimmed with silver, were adorned with vibrant bouquets of fresh flowers, their colors providing a soft contrast to the regal surroundings. The guests, successful entrepreneurs, renowned philanthropists, and members of the media, moved gracefully among the tables, dressed in their finest attire. The air buzzed with polite laughter, and the gentle clinking of wine glasses, creating an atmosphere that was lively yet undeniably sophisticated. Behind the glitz and glamour of the banquet lay an entirely different world. The kitchen remained as hectic and high-pressure as ever, its cold fluorescent lights reflecting off stainless steel walls. Steam rose from sizzling pans, mingling with the rich aromas of food and oil, while the sharp sounds of chopping knives and shouted orders filled the air, shattering any semblance of quiet. This was the beating heart of the restaurant, the place where everything had to operate with precision to sustain the flawless facade of the event outside. Amara entered the banquet hall, draped in an elegant light blue gown. Ample yet undeniably refined, she radiated confidence, her every step steady, though she retained the humility that had always defined her. Her gaze swept across the room, absorbing the stark contrast between this grand space and her memories of grueling days in the cold, chaotic kitchen. Near one of the tables, Sophie, a former co-worker from the kitchen, stood out in a striking red dress, her demeanor as haughty as ever. Spotting Amara, Sophie smirked, her expression dripping with malice.
"I can't believe it,"
Sophie said, her voice laced with venom.
"Did you really climb your way up here with just a bit of luck?"
Not far away, Mr. Klein, the restaurant's former manager, navigated the tables with his usual air of superiority. When his eyes landed on Amara, his lips curled into a condescending smile.
Well, who we have here?"
he remarked, his tone mocking.
"Our charity hero. Who would have thought you'd ever show up in a place like this?"
From a distance, Isaiah leaned against a shadowed corner, his eyes fixed intently on the unfolding scene. He didn't step forward, but every expression, every mocking word directed at Amara reached his ears. At first, his gaze held a hint of surprise, but the longer he watched, the more evident his admiration became. Isaiah realized that Amara wasn't merely standing there enduring the scorn. Every word she spoke, every look she gave, radiated an unshakable strength, a resilience that refused to be broken. Amara stepped into the banquet hall, her posture confident, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness as she felt the weighted gazes turning toward her. The soft blue gown she wore moved gracefully with each step, enhancing her elegance and poise. Her presence drew glances from several guests, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and admiration. But not all gazes were kind. Among the admiring stares were familiar eyes, faces she could never forget, former colleagues who had once mocked and belittled her. Almost immediately, whispers began to ripple through a small group near one of the tables. They leaned in close, their hushed voices loud enough for Amara to catch snippets of their pointed remarks. Their tone dripped with derision, each word aimed like a barb at the composure she worked hard to maintain.
"What is she even doing here? Who invited her? It has to be Eleanor. I can't think of any other reason."
A woman in the group let out a giggle, her gaze briefly darting toward Amara before returning to her companions, as if she just witnessed some sort of private joke. Amara heard it all, but she refused to let it shake her. Taking a deep breath, she held her head high and continued walking, her steps steady. The cutting words, sharp as they were, fell like raindrops against the armor of resilience she had forged over the years. As she neared the kitchen, the place that had once been her world, a familiar voice rang out, laced with mockery. Sophie, dressed in a striking red gown, appeared in the hallway, her eyes gleaming with disdain as they swept over Amara. Sophie had been one of Amara's co-workers and a relentless tormentor, seizing every chance to belittle her. Now her gaze raked Amara from head to toe, searching for any vulnerability she could exploit.
"I didn't think you could afford a ticket to an event like this,"
Sophie said, her voice loud enough to draw attention from those nearby. Several curious eyes turned toward the exchange, while Sophie folded her arms and smirked, her posture exuding defiance. Amara stopped. This time, she didn't avert her gaze. She met Sophie's eyes directly, her expression steady and unyielding. Her voice, calm yet firm, carried the weight of every battle she'd fought to stand here.
Sometimes you don't need money, just the courage to keep going.
Her words struck like a blade, cutting through Sophie's smug demeanor. For a brief moment, the smirk on Sophie's lips faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. But she quickly recovered, shrugging with exaggerated indifference.
"Oh, courage, is it?"
Sophie replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm.
What a romantic way to describe sheer luck. But luck doesn't last forever, you know. I wonder, without Eleanor, what would you even look like now?
Amara stood her ground, unflinching. She took a step closer, her voice measured but resolute, every word deliberate.
Maybe you're right. Luck doesn't last, but hard work does. And that's something I've always had, whether you choose to see it or not.
A few people nearby fell silent, their attention drawn to the charged exchange. Sophie glanced around, realizing the tide was shifting against her. She forced a chuckle, lifting her chin in a weak attempt to reclaim control.
Hard work? How quaint. I don't have to try that hard.
Amara didn't let her continue. Her voice cut through with clarity and strength.
Then congratulations, Sophie. But I won't apologize for working hard to be here, and I hope you know whose shoulders you're standing on.
Sophie's mouth fell open, words failing her. Amara didn't linger. She turned and walked away, leaving Sophie frozen in place, her expression a mixture of fury and helplessness. From a distance, Isaiah had been watching the entire scene unfold. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on Amara, tracking every deliberate movement and sharp response. Slowly, a faint smile formed on his lips. Admiration swelled in his chest, not just for her resilience, but for the way she faced her past without letting it diminish the strength and confidence she carried now. As Amara stepped away from her tense confrontation with Sophie, she passed near the service counter, her composure intact, even as a lingering discomfort simmered beneath the surface. Just then, a familiar voice reached her ears, its tone sweet yet laced with unmistakable mockery.
Well, isn't it fascinating to see you here, Amara? Who would have thought, right?
Amara lifted her head slightly, her gaze locking onto Mr. Klein, the restaurant's former manager. He stood there in a charcoal gray suit, a glass of red wine in hand. His stance exuded overconfidence and the smile on his lips. That same false, calculated smile she remembered all too well, instantly brought back memories of the difficult days she had endured under his supervision.
Amara, you're full of surprises,
he continued, his words drawn out as if savoring each moment.
I suppose dear Eleanor must be feeling particularly generous. Not everyone is lucky enough to get such special treatment.
His words were like a sharp dagger, aimed directly at Amara's pride. Nearby, a few former colleagues chuckled quietly, their eager eyes fixed on her as though waiting for the show to begin. Amara drew a deep breath, steadying herself. She looked directly at Mr. Klein, her gaze unflinching, her voice calm yet cutting.
I believe those who work hard don't need anyone's pity, but then again, perhaps you wouldn't know what that feels like.
The air around them seemed to still. Mr. Klein's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered, shrugging with exaggerated nonchalance.
Hard work? How amusing to hear that from you. But tell me, Amara, just how far did your so-called hard work get you before Eleanor found you? Sometimes we have to admit that luck is what truly makes the difference.
Amara remained unmoved. She took a deliberate step closer, her voice unwavering, each word sharpened by conviction.
Luck might open doors, Mr. Klein, but seizing those opportunities takes skill, and I don't expect someone who steps on others to climb higher to understand that.
A hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered nearby. A few exchanged startled glances, and some even turned away, avoiding Amara's piercing gaze. Mr. Klein, though momentarily caught off guard, refused to back down.
I don't need a lecture on skill from you, Amara.
he replied, his tone now colder.
What I've accomplished has earned me my place here. And you're just a feel-good story, dressed up to please Eleanor.
Amara smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in her expression. Her voice, quiet but resolute, carried the weight of her unwavering principles.
Maybe you're right, Mr. Klein, but at least I can say I never had to tear others down to prove my worth. That's something I'm sure you could never claim.
The atmosphere in the room seemed to freeze. Mr. Klein stood frozen, his face betraying a flicker of confusion as he struggled to respond. The smug smile he had worn moments ago had vanished, replaced by a brief but telling hesitation. Amara didn't wait for him to regain his footing. She stepped past him with purpose, leaving him standing there amidst the weight of many watching eyes. From a distance, Isaiah had watched the entire scene unfold, from beginning to end. His eyes, initially filled with surprise, slowly softened into admiration. In Amara, he saw a resilience, a strength that far exceeded anything he had ever imagined about her. He didn't step forward, choosing instead to quietly follow her with his gaze as she continued to stride across the room, confident and commanding. Her presence exuded a grace and dignity that made her seem untouchable. Isaiah let out a quiet sigh, a complicated emotion stirring within him. A mixture of admiration and a faint pang of regret. The sound of hushed laughter and scornful whispers echoed throughout the ballroom, like invisible daggers slicing through the already stifling air. They snaked into every corner, spreading like a toxic haze, piercing Amara's ears, one word at a time. Though she fought to remain composed, each cruel murmur resurrected memories she had tried so desperately to bury. Memories of disdain, probing stares, and the mocking laughter she had once endured. Amara stood in the grand hall, the crystal chandelier casting its dazzling light upon her, illuminating her elegant features amidst the crowd. But even the brilliance of the chandelier couldn't mask the tension in her eyes. Eyes that bore the marks of a resolve hardened by years spent on the margins, judged and dismissed. Her gaze swept across familiar faces, former colleagues who had once belittled her, people to whom she had sacrificed her youth to prove herself, only to be met with indifference and contempt. The same faces, the same piercing looks, now regarded her with the same judgmental air. Amara took a deep breath, each inhale a conscious effort to steady herself. She no longer wanted to hide. She no longer wanted to stay silent. The fear of their eyes had long since left her. Tonight, she wasn't here to endure. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes gleamed like tempered steel. Unyielding and resolute, stepping forward, she reached for the microphone on the nearby table. The soft hum of the microphone filled the room as she lifted it, a subtle announcement that demanded attention in the now silent crowd. Every eye turned to her, their expressions ranging from surprise to curiosity, from challenge to unease. In a distant corner of the room, Isaiah stood with a wine glass in hand, his gaze fixed on Amara, following her every movement. When she stepped forward and took hold of the microphone, he set his glass down on a nearby table, his focus sharpening entirely on her. His movements were slow but deliberate, as if the world around him had faded into insignificance. He tilted his head slightly, his expression a mix of intent curiosity and quiet admiration, sensing the gravity of the moment. Amara raised the microphone to her lips, her voice cutting through the stillness. At first it was soft, but each word, each syllable, carried the weight of her spirit, gradually filling the vast space.
This is the place where I once worked, a place where I gave my all, only to be met with disdain instead of recognition.
She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room, lingering on those who avoided her eyes before moving on to others who met her look with defiance.
They looked down on me, not because I failed, but because I wasn't like them. I endured it. I stayed silent. But not tonight. Tonight, I'm not here to seek revenge.
Her voice grew firmer, her eyes sharper, like a blade poised to strike.
I don't need to prove anything to those who thought I wasn't enough. I'm here to remind all of you that a person's worth is not defined by their status, their background, or the color of their skin.
The murmurs that had filled the room earlier had vanished entirely. The air felt heavy, as if the weight of her words had drawn every breath from the space. Each syllable cut through the pretense that many in the room had cloaked themselves in. She took another deep breath and stepped forward again, the chandelier's light reflecting in her determined eyes.
True worth lies in what we do, how we treat others, and the courage to stand up, even when the world tries to tear us down.
The room was utterly still. Not a sound, not a movement. Amara's breath was steady now, and her voice carried the sharp finality of a blade as she delivered her last words.
If you can't see that, then you are the ones most deserving of pity.
Her final words hung in the air like a thunderclap, their echoes lingering long after her voice had faded. A few bowed their heads in silence, while others offered awkward, forced smiles to mask their discomfort or shame. Isaiah remained motionless in the corner, his gaze unwavering. At first, he had believed he understood her, but now, as he witnessed the unyielding strength and resilience emanating from her, he realized she was far more formidable than he had ever imagined. Amara set the microphone down on the table, her hands still trembling slightly from the emotional weight of her words. She turned to leave, her gaze steady but her heart heavy. Just then, a deep, resonant voice broke through the tense silence from across the room.
Wait.
Every eye in the room turned toward the source of the voice. Isaiah stepped out from the shadows, the light from the chandelier glinting off his black suit, accentuating his commanding presence. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one rippling through the heavy stillness. He looked at no one but Amara. His gaze was tender yet laced with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. As he approached her, he gave a slight nod, a gesture of reassurance. Gently, he reached for the microphone she had just placed down, then turned to face the crowd. His eyes swept over the room, pausing briefly on faces filled with curiosity, unease, and even guilt. Isaiah raised the microphone to his lips, his voice calm yet powerful as it reverberated through the hall.
Oh my God, do none of you realize what just happened? Can any of you claim the courage to do what Amara just did?
The room remained utterly silent, all eyes fixed on him. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but Isaiah didn't relent.
Amara doesn't need anyone's pity. She doesn't need favoritism, and she certainly doesn't need your excuses.
He paused, his sharp gaze cutting through the crowd.
What she embodies is courage, resilience, and self-respect, qualities I fear not everyone here possesses.
He emphasized every word, making the room feel heavier with each syllable. The earlier murmurs had disappeared completely. Some hung their heads in shame, unable to meet his piercing gaze. Isaiah took another step forward, his eyes landing squarely on Mr. Klein, Amara's former manager. When he spoke again, his tone dropped, softer but sharper than a blade.
And you, Mr. Klein, you abused your position to demean and crush an employee, not because she wasn't competent, but because she didn't fit the warped standards you decided to enforce. You weren't just wrong. You are the epitome of everything we need to change.
Mr. Klein stood frozen, his face ashen. The wine glass in his hand trembled slightly. He forced a weak smile, but the room offered him no solace. Every gaze bore down on him, waiting for his response.
I didn't think things would go this far,
he stammered, his voice barely audible. Isaiah didn't let him finish. He stepped closer, his voice cutting through the air like a razor.
Didn't think? Oh my God, you seriously didn't think your words and actions could hurt someone else? Stop hiding behind excuses, Mr. Klein. You were wrong, and now it's time to make it right.
The air in the room felt suffocating. No one dared speak. Mr. Klein's eyes darted around, searching for some form of support, but he found only averted gazes. At last, under the crushing weight of Isaiah's cold stare and the oppressive silence of the room, he spoke.
I'm sorry, Amara. I was wrong.
The apology was reluctant, forced, but it rang clearly through the air. A few people nodded quietly, as though agreeing with Isaiah, but lacking the bravery to voice their thoughts. Amara stood still, her eyes resting on Mr. Klein's face for a moment. She said nothing, but her gaze carried no anger or pain. Instead, it was calm and unwavering, filled with strength. She turned to Isaiah, and their eyes met in a moment laden with meaning. No words passed between them, but her look conveyed gratitude and respect. Isaiah held her gaze for a moment before turning back to the crowd. When he spoke again, his tone was gentler, but still carried the weight of his conviction.
I hope tonight serves as more than just another event of numbers and prestige. Let it be a reminder that if we don't change how we see and treat each other, everything we build will be for nothing.
Isaiah set the microphone down, his eyes following Amara as she walked away. A faint smile crossed her lips, one filled with gratitude and unshakable determination. Isaiah waited long after Amara had left the crowd. His eyes never left her retreating figure as she moved toward a quiet corner of the room, where the soft glow of wall sconces bathed her in a gentle light. Amara stood there, one hand resting lightly against the nearest wall, drawing in a deep breath as if to steady the storm of emotions still raging within her. Isaiah approached, his steps firm yet almost silent. When he was just a few strides away, he stopped, his deep, resonant voice breaking the heavy silence.
Amara!
She turned, her eyes widening slightly with surprise and a trace of wariness. Her breath slowed as she saw him standing there, but the guarded look in her gaze remained steadfast.
You've changed the way I see the world,
Isaiah said, his voice low and filled with emotion. He stepped closer, closing the gap between them.
I used to think that life had to be controlled, calculated. I believed every decision should be made with logic and safety in mind.
He paused, his tender eyes locking onto hers as if willing his words to etch themselves into her soul.
But you taught me that sometimes simply standing up for what's right can shatter an entire belief system. You did something that so many in that room, including myself, didn't have the courage to do.
Amara looked at him, her eyes flickering with a hint of emotion. Yet the resoluteness in her gaze remained, a shield she had learned to wield.
Isaiah,
she said, her voice soft yet firm.
Words are easy. If you're sincere, prove it through action, not for me, but for yourself.
Isaiah tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips.
I will, Amara,
he replied, his voice steady and certain.
Not for anyone else, but for you and for me. I can't bear to lose you again, and I refuse to keep living within the limits I've placed on myself.
Actions and emotions, Amara said nothing, but her gaze lingered on Isaiah's face, searching for the truth behind his words. Finally, she gave a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that he had reached her.
We all need time to prove ourselves, Isaiah,
she said, her voice carrying quiet strength.
I'm not asking you to be perfect, only to be ready to change.
Isaiah stepped back slightly, granting her space, though his eyes never left hers.
You'll see, Amara. I'll prove it, day by day, with every action.
Amara turned and left the restaurant, the soft blue fabric of her dress catching the night breeze. Her head was held high, every step radiating pride and confidence, as if the burdens of her past had finally fallen away. Isaiah followed at a respectful distance, not too close, but never letting her drift too far. His eyes remained fixed on her, not with possessiveness, but with quiet determination, a vow to walk beside her into whatever future they might forge together. Above them, the night sky sparkled with countless stars, a symbol of the dreams and hopes that had begun to take root. Their light fell upon the two figures below, one who had found strength in overcoming adversity, and the other who was learning to rise beyond his own limitations. Amara walked forward, her footsteps soft against the quiet night, yet each one carrying the weight of a journey defined by resolve. Above her, the night sky shimmered with countless stars, mirroring the aspirations burning fiercely within her. After so many years, this was the first time Amara felt she was walking a path of her own choosing. Not to please anyone, not to prove anything, but simply to become her true self. Behind her, Isaiah followed at a measured pace. The distance between them seemed to symbolize an unspoken promise, that he would be there, not to impose or pressure, but ready to stand by her when she needed him. Yet both of them knew the road ahead would not be illuminated solely by light. Greater challenges awaited, not on deserted streets, but in rooms bright with harsh lights, where power and pressure reigned. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows of the Eleanor Corporation offices, Amara sat before her computer screen, her eyes sharp with focus. A notification flashed on the screen.
Strategic meeting. Boardroom.
Across the building, Isaiah prepared himself for a new workday, but in his mind, the image of Amara beneath the star-filled sky lingered. He understood that today's meeting would not just be about business. It would be a moment where he and Amara, in their own ways, would prove they were ready to challenge prejudices and reshape how others perceived the world. The serene quiet of the morning gave way to the tense atmosphere of the boardroom, where every glance and every word carried weight. This time, Amara was no longer a passive observer. She was ready to be the one who shaped the narrative. The boardroom of Eleanor Corporation, where pivotal decisions were often made, had been meticulously prepared for today. Amara stood at one end of the long conference table, her face radiating confidence. Yet the slight tension in her hands, gripping the remote control for the presentation, betrayed the anxiety she worked so hard to conceal. Her elegant gray suit hugged her slender frame, accentuating her professional demeanor amidst a room filled with seasoned veterans. Her gaze swept across the faces before her. At the other end of the table, Richard Stanton reclined comfortably in his chair, one hand resting idly on the polished wood surface. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, carried an unmistakable chill. The silver of his hair and the impeccable tailoring of his black suit amplified his commanding presence, but it was the subtle disdain etched into his expression that Amara felt most keenly. At the head of the table, Isaiah sat upright, his hands clasped firmly before him. The dark suit he wore added to his composed aura, but his gaze frequently shifted toward Amara, his concern mingling with a trace of tension. Beside him, Eleanor watched the room with quiet intensity. Her sharp eyes moved deliberately from one person to the next, as if cataloging every expression, every reaction. The atmosphere in the room was thick, nearly suffocating, as Amara took a deliberate step forward, her eyes fixing on the large screen behind her. Weeks of preparation were distilled into the charts and numbers that now illuminated the screen. But she knew this was about more than her presentation. Her presence here, a young black woman in a room dominated by power and tradition, was already a challenge to many of those seated around her. A moment of silence hung in the air, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Amara drew in a deep breath, letting her shoulders relax slightly before she began to speak.
We are at a critical juncture where real change is not only possible but necessary. And today, I will show you how we can achieve it.
Her voice rang clear, slicing through the oppressive quiet. Every gaze turned toward her, some filled with skepticism, others with curiosity. But a select few, like Isaiah's and Eleanor's, carried a glimmer of belief. The room began to listen, the weight of her words pulling them in. Amara knew that every sentence she spoke was more than a pitch for a project. It was the foundation of how they would see her, her abilities, her worth, and the truth that transcended prejudice. Amara stepped forward to the head of the conference table, clutching the remote in her hand. Her shoulders were straight, her gaze resolute as it fixed on the large screen in front of her. With a decisive motion, she started the presentation. The glow of the screen illuminated her face, highlighting the intensity and determination in every movement. On the screen, charts and images appeared in sharp detail. Statistics on marginalized workers, the challenges they faced, and a detailed roadmap for transforming their realities. Each slide had been painstakingly crafted, each detail embodying the countless sleepless nights Amara had spent perfecting her message. She took a deep breath, ensuring her voice would carry with clarity and confidence.
Thank you all for being here today. I believe we all understand the weight of our responsibility, not just to this corporation, but to the broader community. The project I'm about to present is how we can fulfill that responsibility.
Her eyes swept across the room. Some attendees were bent over their notepads, jotting down notes, while others met her gaze with skepticism, none more so than Richard Stanton. He sat with his arms crossed, leaning back in his chair, his icy stare unmistakably critical. Amara pressed a button on the remote, transitioning to the next slide. A growth chart appeared, accompanied by images of marginalized workers, faces brimming with hope but etched with the wear of struggle.
Our goal must extend beyond profit. Billionaire Corporation has always prided itself on the values of humanity and integrity, and this project will stand as a testament to those ideals.
Her voice grew stronger, filling the room with conviction that demanded attention.
Marginalized workers don't need pity. What they need is opportunity. Opportunity to learn, to work, and to build better lives for themselves and their families. That is what this project seeks to provide.
She advanced to the next slide, which outlined the specific steps for implementation. Skill training programs to equip workers with the tools needed to meet modern market demands. Financial support initiatives to help them overcome initial obstacles. Creating an equitable workplace where everyone has an equal chance to grow and succeed. Amara paused, letting her gaze travel around the room, ensuring she had their full attention.
This project isn't just an investment. It's how we create a sustainable future, not just for this corporation, but for society as a whole. This is our chance to lead, not only in business, but in driving real, meaningful change.
The room fell into a profound silence. Not the silence of indifference, but of focused contemplation. Some attendees nodded subtly in agreement, while others, like Richard Stanton, maintained their stoic expressions, though their eyes now held a hint of reflection. Lowering the remote, Amara concluded her presentation with a faint but confident smile.
Thank you for listening. I'm happy to address any questions to clarify the details of this project.
She stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the room once more. This was more than a presentation. It was her declaration of purpose, her assertion of worth, and her unwavering resolve to make a difference. Amara had just concluded her presentation, her confident voice still resonating in the room. The silence that followed was tense, not entirely comfortable. Everyone seemed to be weighing her words or perhaps searching for a way to counter them. That silence was soon shattered when Richard Stanton, seated at the far end of the table, raised an eyebrow with exaggerated theatrics and leaned back in his chair. His immaculate black suit only accentuated his aura of authority. Crossing his arms over his chest, he let his cold, calculating gaze sweep over Amara like a predator sizing up its prey. He let out a faint, derisive chuckle, half scornful, half triumphant.
"Well, that sounds noble,"
he began, his deep voice low but sharp, each word cutting through the air like a blade.
"But let's be honest. Do you really think someone who once waited tables can grasp the intricacies of strategic management or long-term vision?"
Richard paused, his eyes narrowing with a mocking glint as he waited for her reaction. When Amara's calm demeanor didn't falter, he pressed on, his tone dripping with even more condescension.
"This corporation doesn't run on goodwill or lofty dreams, young lady. This is a high-stakes game, and to survive here, you'll need a lot more than an inspiring presentation."
He leaned back further, his smirk widening, as though he'd already won an argument that Amara had yet to engage in. Richard's words hung in the air like a warning bell, amplifying the tension in the room. A few attendees ducked their heads, pretending to take notes, eager to avoid being drawn into the fray. Others exchanged furtive glances, their faces betraying unease, though no one dared to openly challenge Richard's position. Seconds ticked by, the oppressive silence growing heavier. A flicker of satisfaction glinted in Richard's eyes, but at the far end of the table, Isaiah shifted, sitting up straighter. His gaze sharpened, moving from quiet observation to unwavering focus on Amara.
"Oh my God, Ikosbani!"
Someone near the door muttered under their breath, only to fall silent under Eleanor's piercing stare. At the head of the table, Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her eyes fixed on Richard. She remained quiet, offering no immediate intervention. Richard, emboldened by the lack of opposition, scanned the room for signs of agreement before returning his attention to Amara. His voice took on a more overtly challenging tone.
"You know, I've met plenty of people like you. People full of passion and noble ideas, but with no real-world experience. The problem isn't that your idea lacks merit. It's that we're talking about millions of dollars, thousands of jobs, and the reputation of Eleanor Corp. Do you truly believe we should risk it all for a project proposed by someone who used to wait tables?"
He emphasized the last words as though they were the ultimate, irrefutable truth. Amara remained still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her gaze locked firmly on Richard. His words cut like a finely honed blade, but instead of retreating, she felt a fire ignite within her. She drew a deep breath and took a single step forward. The glow from the presentation screen illuminated her face, highlighting the unwavering determination in her eyes. Across the room, Isaiah leaned forward, his attention riveted on Amara. Beside him, Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile, as though she knew this was the moment Amara would prove her worth. Another silence fell over the room, but this time it was not born of fear. It was a silence charged with anticipation, a collective holding of breath as everyone waited for Amara's response. Amara stood tall, her shoulders lifting slightly as if shedding the weight of pressure, though her gaze never wavered. Her hands rested calmly at her sides, but the poise in her stance commanded the room's attention. Drawing in a deep breath, she stepped forward again, the glow of the presentation screen casting a light that sharpened the resolve in her eyes. She locked eyes with Richard Stanton, her gaze cutting through the layers of arrogance he wore like armor. There was no anger, no defensiveness, only an unshakable confidence.
"You're right,"
she began, her voice clear and firm, breaking the tension that hung in the air.
"I was a waitress, and that job taught me lessons no book on strategic management ever could."
A faint murmur rippled from one corner of the room, but quickly subsided as Amara continued, her voice gaining strength with each word.
"I learned to listen, not just to respond, but to truly understand. I learned to put the needs of others above my own. And most importantly,"
she paused, her gaze sharpening as it bore into Richard's,
"I learned how to face the disdain of people like you."
A quiet,
"Oh,"
escaped from someone at the far end of the table, a reflexive reaction to the boldness of her words. Amara, unbothered, stepped closer. The distance between her and Richard Stanton had narrowed to only a few strides. Richard raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. But rather than retreat, he smirked, his voice laced with mockery.
"And you think those lessons from waiting tables will help you lead a large-scale project? Fascinating. Perhaps you should understand that empathy doesn't pay the bills, nor does it fill our bank accounts."
Amara didn't blink. Instead, she shook her head slightly, her voice turning steely.
"But empathy is the only thing that gives those numbers meaning."
She paused, turning to scan the room, her eyes meeting each person's in turn.
"Let me be perfectly clear,"
she continued, her voice resonating through the quiet space.
"Being a waitress didn't diminish my value. On the contrary, it made me stronger, more determined, and deeply aware of what truly matters in business: people."
Her gaze returned to Richard, carrying the weight of a final challenge.
If you believe that someone's past job or background defines their worth, then you are the one who doesn't align with the values this company claims to uphold.
The boardroom fell into a profound silence, not the silence of disinterest, but the silence of reflection. A few attendees lowered their heads, avoiding her eyes, while others began to nod subtly in agreement. Richard Stanton, though still maintaining a veneer of composure, couldn't entirely mask his unease. He straightened in his chair, his lips pressing into a thin line as if preparing to respond, but no suitable words came. The boardroom was shrouded in a heavy silence, the kind that pressed down on the room like an unrelenting weight. It was the silence that lingered after Amara's firm, unyielding words. No one dared to disrupt it. Every gaze in the room seemed to stop flitting nervously between one another, instead settling on Amara, a young woman standing tall in the center of the room, radiating a confidence and inner strength that seemed immovable. The skeptical and doubtful eyes that had greeted her earlier now shifted to something else: reflection. Some heads bowed slightly, shoulders curling inward as though they'd been struck by a truth too powerful to ignore. Others raised their gaze with a newfound respect, as if witnessing something entirely unexpected yet undeniable. At the head of the table, Eleanor leaned forward, a small, satisfied smile gracing her lips. Slowly, she raised her hands and began to clap. A measured, deliberate applause that echoed like the opening drumbeat of an epic symphony. The sound broke through the tension, not just as an acknowledgement of Amara's triumph, but as a way to release the room from its collective unease. Her applause was a signal. A few people near her hesitated, glancing at each other briefly before joining in. The clapping began as a scattered murmur, hesitant and uneven, but it grew quickly. Within moments, the room filled with applause, a chain reaction of agreement and acceptance sweeping across the table. The doubtful stares were gone. In their place were subtle nods of approval and reluctant but unmistakable smiles of acknowledgement. At his seat, Isaiah sat quietly, his hands clasped together in front of him. He didn't join in the applause, nor did he speak, but his eyes remained fixed on Amara, deep, gentle, and unwavering. His gaze carried a mix of admiration and pride. He had chosen not to intervene, to let her face the doubt and criticism on her own. She hadn't needed his protection. Amara had stood her ground and proven herself with strength, integrity, and undeniable competence.
She did it?
He thought to himself, the corners of his lips curling into a faint smile. As the applause gradually subsided, Eleanor rose to her feet, placing her hands lightly on the table as if to command the room's attention without effort. Her gaze swept over the attendees before finally landing on Amara, who stood unwavering, her composure unshaken.
Amara,
Eleanor began, her voice neither loud nor soft, but every word rang with clarity and purpose.
you have done an exceptional job. I fully agree with what you've said. An individual's worth is not defined by their background, but by the courage and integrity they bring to their work and their life.
She turned her focus to Richard Stanton, her sharp eyes cutting into him like a scalpel. Her voice remained calm but carried a distinct edge.
This corporation was built on those values, and we do not simply pay lip service to them. We act on them. This is a place where everyone has the chance to prove their worth, if they deserve it.
A bow of resolve, an unforgettable moment. Amara inclined her head slightly, her eyes glowing with a mix of resolve and gratitude. She said nothing more, but her steady stance and calm expression spoke volumes. She felt it in her chest that this moment marked a turning point. It wasn't just about Eleanor's acknowledgement or Isaiah's quiet pride. It was the affirmation that she truly belonged here, not through anyone's permission, but because she had earned it. Isaiah, watching her every movement, exchanged a brief glance with Eleanor, a silent moment of shared understanding. His heart swelled with pride, a deeper admiration for Amara settling within him. Amara stepped back from her position, her eyes sweeping over the table. Some faces still showed traces of unease, but she saw something else now. A change in their gaze. Respect had begun to replace skepticism. At the far end of the table, Richard Stanton blinked rapidly, his hands tightening into fists as if to mask the sting of defeat. But no one else in the room seemed to notice or care. Amara turned and left the presentation area, her head held high. Her reflection in the gleaming glass walls was a portrait of confidence and courage. Isaiah remained seated, his gaze following her every step. Again, he glanced at Eleanor, but this time, his focus shifted to the horizon ahead, a future he knew would be brighter with Amara in it. A woman of strength, resilience, and undeniable inspiration to everyone around her. Amara stepped out of the boardroom, her stride slow but deliberate. The plush carpet beneath her feet absorbed the sound of her steps, and the soft white glow of overhead lights bathed the hallway in a calming warmth. A faint sense of relief coursed through her after the grueling presentation, but it was tempered by a quiet, persistent unease. She couldn't stop her thoughts from drifting to Isaiah, the man whose inscrutable gaze often felt like an impenetrable wall she could never fully scale. As she reached the elevator, her hand extended toward the call button. Before she could press it, a deep, familiar voice broke the stillness from behind her.
Amara, wait.
She froze, her eyes widening in surprise. Slowly, she turned to find Isaiah approaching her, his footsteps deliberate yet measured. His tall frame, draped in a perfectly tailored black suit, radiated authority, but there was something in his expression, a quiet intensity, tempered by an unfamiliar softness, that gave him an almost vulnerable air. The overhead lights caught the sharp angles of his face, emphasizing the seriousness in his eyes. A gaze laced with something she had never seen before. Isaiah stopped just before her, leaning slightly forward, his deep brown eyes locking onto hers.
You don't need anyone to protect you?
He said, his voice low but resolute, each word imbued with its own weight.
You proved that today, in front of everyone.
Amara raised an eyebrow slightly, her curiosity evident, but her steady gaze betrayed no hint of retreat.
But,
Isaiah continued, his voice dropping, almost as if in confession.
I realize now that I was wrong. Wrong to doubt you, wrong to think you didn't belong here.
Amara tilted her head, saying nothing, her eyes searching his face as though trying to decipher the layers behind his words.
Amara Vincide.
He said her name again, and this time there was a rare, unmistakable sincerity in his tone.
I always believed that this company needed only the best, those with the most impeccable resumes. But today, you showed me something far more important, courage and integrity. They matter more than anything, and I learned that from you.
He paused, taking a deep breath, his gaze unwavering as it rested on her face.
And because of that, I can't lose you, not just in this job, but in my life. You've changed the way I see the world, Amara. I can't let you go.
Amara's response, Amara studied him, her eyes briefly reflecting a flicker of emotion before her composure returned. A small smile curved her lips, not wide but full of understanding.
Isaiah, your words, they're beautiful.
She began, her voice gentle but firm, each word carrying the strength of her convictions.
But I don't need apologies or promises, no matter how sincere they are.
Her gaze held his, bright with determination.
What I need is action, Isaiah. If you truly want to prove yourself, then don't just say the right things. Do the right things, not for me, but for yourself.
Isaiah's lips pressed together briefly, his expression thoughtful as her words sank in. Slowly, a faint, genuine smile crossed his face, carrying a sense of both agreement and resolve.
I understand,
he said softly, his voice warm and steady.
Then let me start here, in this moment.
Amara said nothing further, only nodding slightly. She turned back to the elevator, stepping inside as the doors slid open. just before they closed, her gaze met his one last time. A silent message passed between them, a message Isaiah understood completely. Isaiah stood in the now empty hallway, alone, but there was no trace of sadness on his face. Instead, a determined smile began to form, a silent vow that he wouldn't let this opportunity slip away. A new beginning. Amara exited the elevator, the gentle breeze from the outer hallway stirring her hair. The soft, fading light of late afternoon cast a golden glow over the space, its warmth a stark contrast to the swirling emotions within her. Isaiah's words replayed in her mind. An unyielding melody urging her to consider the paths ahead. She raised her eyes to the expansive glass window before her, watching as the city skyline was painted in hues of amber and crimson by the setting sun. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt something unexpected. Hope, a quiet, persistent hope, emerging from where it had been buried for so long, now beginning to bloom with quiet strength. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. The screen displayed Eleanor's name.
Amara, could you come by my house tonight? I'd like to have a small gathering, just family.
Eleanor's voice was as gentle and warm as ever, but this time, there was an unmistakable note of expectation in her words. Amara hesitated briefly before smiling softly and replying,
"Of course, Mrs. Eleanor."
As she ended the call, her heart beat a little faster. She didn't know what the evening would bring, but some part of her was ready to find out. In the glow of the setting sun, her car glided along the road leading to Eleanor's estate, a place where new questions, new emotions, and perhaps even new opportunities awaited. The living room of Eleanor's estate glowed with the warm light of an ornate crystal chandelier. Its dazzling rays danced across the room, casting reflections that imbued the space with both grandeur and intimacy. A small dining table draped in pristine white linen stood adorned with arrangements of white roses intertwined with delicate baby's breath. Flickering vanilla-scented candles added a gentle, soothing aroma to the air. In one corner of the room, a classic piano exuded an air of elegance, its polished keys seeming to await a touch to awaken their melodic soul. From discreet speakers, the soft strains of jazz floated through the air, blending seamlessly with the quiet murmur of conversation between Eleanor and Isaiah. Amara stepped into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. She wore a floor-length pastel gown, its fabric flowing gently around her figure. The dress was simple yet sophisticated, a reflection of her own understated elegance. She wore no extravagant jewelry, but her steady gaze and composed stride made her the undeniable focal point of the room. Isaiah stood near the fireplace, impeccably dressed in a black suit with a perfectly knotted tie. His expression betrayed a flicker of nervousness, though it was tempered by an unmistakable resolve. As Amara entered, he drew a deep breath, as though steeling himself for a moment he had long anticipated. At a small bar nearby, Eleanor held a glass of red wine. She was dressed in an emerald evening gown, striking yet gracefully dignified. Her eyes sparkled with joy and a subtle undercurrent of expectation, as if she were awaiting a moment of great significance to unfold. The chandelier's golden light played across their faces, framing the trio in a tableau of beauty and emotion. A scene brimming with unspoken words and feelings on the verge of revelation. As the evening wore on and the chatter and laughter softened, only the gentle melodies from the piano lingered in the air. Guests sipped the last of their wine, their conversations shifting to light-hearted discussions of work and family. Isaiah sat quietly at the corner of the table, taking a deep breath. He set his wine glass down with a soft clink and rose to his feet. The simple act was enough to draw the attention of everyone in the room. He clapped his hands lightly twice, and the room instantly fell silent. All eyes turned toward him, including Eleanor's. She regarded her son with a mixture of curiosity and faint approval, the hint of a knowing smile playing on her lips. Across from Isaiah, Amara tilted her head slightly, her eyes reflecting a spark of surprise, though her composed expression remained. Isaiah let his gaze sweep the room, meeting the eyes of each guest before finally settling on Amara. His smile was small, warm yet tinged with a subtle nervousness.
"Ladies and gentlemen,"
he began, his deep, steady voice cutting through the quiet.
"Tonight is not just an ordinary family gathering, it's also an opportunity. An opportunity for me to express my gratitude, especially to you, Amara."
The room stilled further, curiosity now evident in every glance. Amara narrowed her eyes slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table, as though steadying herself against the weight of his words. Isaiah continued, taking slow, deliberate steps toward her.
"Amara, you've not only changed the way I see my work in this company, but you've also changed the way I see myself. You've taught me that strength isn't defined by power or position, but by the courage and integrity to do what is right."
Amara held his gaze, her own eyes now betraying a flicker of emotion she could no longer hide. Isaiah's smile deepened slightly, though his breathing quickened as though summoning every ounce of his courage to press on. The room remained utterly silent, the weight of the moment pulling everyone in. Eleanor, seated nearby, placed her wine glass gently on the table, her expression softening into one of quiet pride. Isaiah stepped purposefully into the center of the room, each movement exuding confidence, though the slight tension in his shoulders betrayed a nervous anticipation. The dazzling light from the crystal chandelier above illuminated his impeccably tailored suit, casting him in a glow that seemed almost deliberate. The room fell into a hushed silence as every pair of eyes turned toward him. No one dared to break the solemnity of the moment. Isaiah's gaze remained fixed on Amara, the woman who he knew had altered the course of his life. Each step he took toward her felt deliberate, as though carrying the weight of his heart with every beat, the rhythm echoing in the charged air around him. When he reached her, Isaiah extended his hand, palm open in an invitation that was both simple and profoundly heartfelt. The gesture carried the weight of countless unspoken words, a sincerity so raw it seemed to quiet the very air in the room. From her place across the room, Eleanor observed the scene with a knowing smile. Her eyes shone with understanding and joy, as though this was a moment she had long anticipated. With a graceful motion, she signaled to the others, ensuring the silence remained undisturbed. Amara, dressed in a soft pastel gown, froze momentarily, caught off guard by Isaiah's unexpected gesture. But as her eyes met his, deep, earnest, and brimming with unshakable sincerity, she found herself unable to refuse. Taking a steadying breath, she rose from her seat and moved toward him with measured grace. Isaiah's lips curved into a gentle smile, one filled with emotion, but grounded in certainty. His voice, rich and steady, broke the silence like the opening notes of a song composed solely for her.
"Amara?"
he began, his tone soft yet resolute.
"Since the day you walked into my life, you've changed everything. By God's grace, I met you. I used to believe that life revolved around success, power, and control."
He paused, his gaze softening as it lingered on her.
"But you,"
he continued, his words now carrying the weight of a confession,
"showed me that the true value of life lies not in those things. It lies in integrity, kindness, and love, qualities you embody so naturally, even in the most challenging moments."
The room remained entranced, every eye fixed on the pair. The silence that enveloped them now carried no awkwardness, only reverence. It was as if each person present could feel the raw, unfiltered energy of their connection. Amara stood before him, her hand instinctively resting against her chest as her heart pounded fiercely. Each word from Isaiah seemed to stir a wave of emotion within her, swelling like the tide. Isaiah inhaled deeply, his voice lowering yet remaining firm.
You are not just an inspiration, he said, his words steady yet brimming with emotion. You are the reason I want to be a better version of myself. Amara, I don't know where I'd be without you. You've changed how I see the world and how I see myself.
Amara's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She said nothing, allowing the silence between them to speak volumes. A silence that carried the shared understanding and connection that words could never fully express. Isaiah returned her smile, as though recognizing that no words could capture the depths of his feelings for her. But in that moment, the gaze they shared was enough. Enough to convey everything that mattered, everything that mattered, everything that had been left unsaid. Isaiah took a deep breath, his hands clenching briefly as if to summon his courage. The stillness in the room made his every movement seem amplified. Slowly, with deliberate grace, he knelt on one knee. The gesture was both solemn and heartfelt, drawing the attention of everyone present. Even the faint sounds of shifting chairs and the soft clink of wine glasses seemed to fade into the background as Isaiah bowed before Amara. From the pocket of his jacket, he carefully retrieved a small velvet box. His hands moved deliberately, almost nervously, as he opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. The flawless stone, set atop a delicate platinum band, caught the chandelier's light and shimmered brilliantly. A symbol of perfection in every way. A symbol of perfection in every way. The room collectively held its breath, the air thick with anticipation and emotion. Onlookers exchanged astonished glances. Some smiled quietly, while others raised their hands to their mouths, overwhelmed by the scene unfolding before them. Isaiah looked up, his gaze locking onto Amara's. In his deep, soulful eyes, she saw everything. Sincerity, resolve, and a love so profound it seemed to fill the entire room. The light reflected in his eyes wasn't from the diamond, but from the raw emotions he could no longer contain.
Amara,
he began, his voice trembling slightly, each word laden with the vulnerability of a man bearing his soul.
I can't imagine a single day without you by my side. By God's grace, I found you, the one who makes everything in my life feel worthwhile.
He paused, his eyes never leaving hers, as though willing her to feel the weight of his words.
Will you join me in building a better future?
He continued, his voice soft but resolute.
Will you marry me?
Amara brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She could hardly believe this moment was real. Her heart pounded, each beat reverberating through the silence that enveloped the room. Isaiah's gaze anchored her, steady and unwavering, making it impossible to look away. The room remained silent, as though even the faintest whisper might shatter the sanctity of the moment. Every eye was on Amara, waiting with bated breath for her answer. Finally, she nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. A tender yet resolute smile spread across her lips, carrying the full weight of her response.
Yes,
she said, her voice soft but strong, a vow meant for both the present and the future. The room erupted into thunderous applause, breaking the tension like a dam bursting. Laughter and joyful tears mixed as those gathered celebrated the moment. Eleanor, standing nearby, discreetly dabbed at the corner of her eye, though her proud smile was impossible to hide. Isaiah rose slowly, taking Amara's hand in his. With utmost care, he slipped the ring onto her finger. His hands trembled slightly, but his touch was gentle, filled with love. Once the ring rested securely on her hand, its brilliance catching the light, he leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear,
I will spend my entire life proving that you made the right choice.
Amara's smile deepened, her eyes shining with unwavering trust.
We'll prove it together,
she replied, her voice steady and sure. In that moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. All that remained was Amara, Isaiah, and a promise, a promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, building a brighter future hand in hand. Thunderous applause filled the room, accompanied by joyful laughter and warm congratulations that created an atmosphere of pure warmth and celebration. Eleanor approached the couple, her radiant smile lighting up her face. Her eyes shimmered with pride and happiness, as if everything she had ever wished for had finally come true.
"By the grace of God, this day has finally come,"
Eleanor said softly, placing her hands gently on Isaiah and Amara's shoulders.
"You two not only make me proud, but remind me that love and courage truly have the power to change."
Isaiah held Amara's hand firmly, his gaze full of reverence. He turned to Eleanor, nodding slightly, a silent gesture of gratitude for her unwavering support.
"Thank you, Mother,"
Isaiah said, his deep voice resonant with emotion.
"And thank God for bringing Amara into my life."
He turned back to Amara, his eyes overflowing with love and gratitude that words could never fully capture. Amara gave his hand a gentle squeeze, her own eyes glistening with tears of emotion. She smiled, her voice soft yet resolute.
"We'll do this together, Isaiah, not just for now, but for the future."
The Eleanor family gathered around the couple, raising their glasses in celebration. The room brimmed with intimacy and joy, like a harmonious melody that touched the hearts of everyone present. Under the warm glow of the chandelier, Amara and Isaiah stood side by side. Their shadows stretched across the floor, intertwining as if to symbolize the unbreakable bond between them. Isaiah turned to Amara, his voice tender but filled with conviction.
"My future begins with this moment, with you."
Amara smiled, tilting her head up to meet his gaze, her eyes shining with light.
"And together, we'll write a story that even the stars will envy."
They nodded in unison, a silent but powerful vow exchanged between them. In that moment, all the struggles of the past seemed to fade away, making room for a new beginning, a future brimming with hope, where they would build everything together with love, integrity, and courage. Amara's story is just the beginning of many surprises waiting to unfold. What new adventures lie ahead? Stay tuned to the channel to never miss out on more emotional and inspiring tales.